The day my neighbor Sharon knocked on my door with a clipboard and a look that could curdle milk, I knew my peaceful life in rural Montana was about to get complicated. I am Marcus Lawson, and I own 40 acres of prime land outside of Bozeman, Montana. The property has been in my family for 3 generations, passed down from my grandfather who bought it back in 1952. The land includes a decent-sized creek that runs through it, and a sturdy wooden bridge that my father built in 1987 to connect our property to the county road on the other side. That bridge became the center of the biggest conflict of my life. Sharon Martinez had moved into the new development that sprang up 2 years ago on what used to be the Henderson farm. The development was called Riverbend Estates, and it was one of those cookie-cutter HOA communities where every house looked basically the same, and the residents had to ask permission to paint their mailbox. The development was built on the north side of Willow Creek, the same creek that ran through my property about half a mile downstream. The problem was geography. When the developers built Riverbend Estates, they only created one entrance that connected to Highway 191, which meant residents had to drive nearly 2 miles around a bend to reach downtown Bozeman. However, if they could cross the creek at my property, they would cut that distance down to about a quarter mile. My bridge sat right there, perfectly positioned, practically begging to be used. Except it was on my private property, built with my family's money on my family's land. "Mr. Lawson," Sharon said that Tuesday morning, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that made my teeth ache. She was probably in her late 40s, with that specific haircut that seemed to be standard issue for HOA board members everywhere. "You know the one. I'm here representing the Riverbend Estates Homeowners Association. I'm the president, and we have a proposal that I think will benefit everyone in the community." I leaned against my door frame, coffee mug in hand. "What kind of proposal?" "Well, we've been noticing that your bridge provides a direct route to town, and we were hoping to negotiate an easement that would allow our residents to use it. We're prepared to offer compensation, of course." I took a sip of my coffee and watched a hawk circle over the field behind her. "The bridge is private property, Sharon. It's been in my family for decades. We built it for our own use." Her smile tightened. "I understand that, but surely you can see the benefit to the community. Our residents are adding to the local economy, supporting local businesses. Shaving off a few miles from their commute would be good for everyone. It would reduce emissions, save gas money, and make life easier for over 100 families." "The bridge is rated for light use," I said. "My truck, maybe a tractor. It's not designed for 100 cars a day driving over it." "We would be happy to contribute to maintenance costs," she said quickly. "We could even form a committee to oversee repairs and upkeep." "It's not about the money, Sharon. It's about the principle. That's my property. My bridge. My family built it for our own use, and I'm not interested in turning it into a public thoroughfare." Her expression went from fake sweet to ice cold in about 2 seconds. "I see. Well, I hope you'll reconsider, Mr. Lawson. I'll be back in touch." She turned on her heel and marched back to her pristine SUV, leaving me standing there wondering what I had just gotten myself into. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail from the Riverbend Estates HOA, written on official letterhead with Sharon's name prominently displayed as president. The letter informed me that they were pursuing legal avenues to establish a public easement across my property, citing some obscure Montana statute about historic access routes. The thing was, there had never been any public access route across my land. The bridge was built long after my grandfather bought the property, and it had only ever been used by my family. I called my lawyer, a guy named Pete Richardson, who had handled my father's estate, and knew the property history inside and out. They don't have a leg to stand on, Pete told me over the phone. Montana law is pretty clear about private property rights. Unless they can prove there was historic public use of that route, which they can't, they're not getting an easement without your consent. So I just ignore them. For now, yes. But Marcus, be prepared. HOAs can be persistent and they've got dues money to burn on legal fees. This might get ugly. Pete was right. It got ugly fast. The following week, I started noticing cars from Riverbend Estates trying to use my bridge anyway. They would turn off the county road onto my private drive, roll right across the bridge, and cut through my property to reach town. The first time it happened, I figured it was an honest mistake. The second time, I put up a large sign that said, "Private property, no trespassing," right at the entrance to my drive. They drove past it anyway. By the end of the week, I was getting a dozen cars a day using my bridge without permission. I called the sheriff's department, and Deputy Tom Morrison came out to take a look. "It's clearly marked as private property," Tom said, examining my signs. "I can start ticketing people for trespassing if you want, but that's going to create a lot of bad blood with your neighbors." "They're not my neighbors," I said. "They're trespassers. How would they like it if I decided to drive through their front yards?" Tom sighed. "Look, I get it. You're in the right here, but I'm just warning you this is going to escalate. These HOA types, they don't back down easy." "Neither do I." Tom started writing tickets. Over the next 2 weeks, he must have issued 30 citations for trespassing. Each ticket was $150, and the recipients were not happy. I started getting angry phone calls at all hours. People showed up at my door to yell at me. Someone left a nasty note on my windshield when I went into town for groceries. Then Sharon showed up again, this time with reinforcements. She brought 3 other people from the HOA board. A bald guy in his 50s who introduced himself as Douglas, a younger woman named Jennifer, and another middle-aged woman named Patricia who kept pursing her lips like she smelled something bad. "Mr. Lawson, this has gotten out of hand," Sharon announced. "We need to find a reasonable solution." "I gave you a reasonable solution," I said. "Use the road you're supposed to use, the one your developer built when they created your subdivision." "That adds 2 miles to everyone's commute," Patricia chimed in. "Do you have any idea how much gas that wastes, how much time that costs?" "That sounds like a problem you should take up with the developer who built your neighborhood," I replied. "Not my problem." Douglas stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. It didn't work. I'm 6'3" and spent 20 years working construction before I semi-retired. "You're being unreasonable," he said. "We're offering fair compensation. We're offering to maintain the bridge. We're being more than generous." "You're offering to use something that belongs to me," I said. "Something I don't want you to use. The answer is no. It was no last week, it's no today, and it'll be no tomorrow." Jennifer, who had been quiet until now, tried a different approach. "Mr. Lawson, we're all part of the same community. We should be working together, not against each other. Think about the families in our development, the kids who have to spend extra time in the car every day, the parents trying to get to work on time. Then you should have thought about that before you bought houses in a development with only one exit," I said. "I'm sorry for your inconvenience, but it's not my responsibility to fix your poor planning." Sharon's face went red. "We're prepared to take this to court. Go ahead." "My lawyer says you don't have a case." They left, but I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next escalation came in the form of a lawsuit. The HOA filed a civil complaint seeking to establish a prescriptive easement across my property. They claimed that the route across my bridge had been used by the public for years and should be considered a public right-of-way. It was complete nonsense. but it meant I had to spend money on legal fees to defend myself. Pete filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that there was no evidence of historic public use. We had photographs, property records, and testimony from longtime residents who confirmed that the bridge had always been private. The judge scheduled a hearing for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I installed a gate. I bought a heavy-duty metal gate and installed it right at the entrance to my driveway, with a lock that only I had the key to. I also installed a camera system so I could document anyone who tried to trespass. The gate made the HOA crowd absolutely furious. I started getting threatening phone calls. Someone spray-painted "selfish" across my mailbox. When I went into town, people I had never met would give me dirty looks or mutter insults under their breath. The local Facebook group had a whole thread about me, with residents of Riverbend Estates calling me everything from greedy to cruel. But I also started hearing from people who supported me. Other property owners in the county reached out to say they were watching my case closely because they worried about HOAs encroaching on private property rights. A local rancher named Bill stopped by to shake my hand and tell me to stand firm. "These HOA people think they can just take what they want," Bill said. "You let them win, and next thing you know, they'll be trying to tell all of us what we can and can't do with our own land." The court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late October. I put on my best suit, which I had only worn twice since my father's funeral, and met Pete at the courthouse in downtown Bozeman. The HOA had hired a lawyer from a firm in Billings, a woman named Rebecca Foster who wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my truck. She presented their case first, arguing that the route across my property had become a necessity for the residents of Riverbend Estates, and that denying them access created an undue hardship. Pete countered by presenting our evidence: photographs of the bridge from the year it was built, property records showing continuous private ownership, and testimony from me and 2 other longtime residents who confirmed that there had never been public access to the bridge. The judge, an older man named Harold Griffin who had a reputation for being no-nonsense, listened carefully to both sides. When the arguments were finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Rebecca Foster. "Counselor, you're asking me to grant an easement across private property based on necessity and convenience. But necessity and convenience aren't the standard for a prescriptive easement. You need to show me continuous public use for at least 5 years, which you haven't done." The bridge was built on private property, maintained with private funds, and used exclusively by the property owner and his family. The fact that your clients find it inconvenient to use the road they're supposed to use is not my concern. He turned to look at Sharon and the other HOA representatives sitting in the gallery. "Furthermore, I'm troubled by reports of harassment and intimidation against Mr. Lawson. If I hear about any further incidents of trespassing, vandalism, or threatening behavior, I will not hesitate to issue restraining orders. Am I making myself clear?" Sharon's face went pale. "Yes, Your Honor. Motion to dismiss is granted," Judge Griffin said, banging his gavel. "We're adjourned." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as we left the courtroom. Pete clapped me on the shoulder. "Good result," he said, "but stay alert. Some people don't know when to quit." He was right to warn me. The HOA didn't quit. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I got a notice from the county saying that the Riverbend Estates HOA had petitioned to have the road leading to my bridge declared a public road, which would require me to remove my gate. It was another bogus claim, but it meant more legal fees and more headaches. Pete filed a response, and we went through the whole process again. This time, the county quickly denied the petition, pointing out that the road had always been private and was clearly marked as such on all county records. But the HOA still wasn't done. Next, they tried to get the county to condemn my bridge as structurally unsafe, which would have required me to either repair it to handle heavy traffic or tear it down. They sent the county engineer out to inspect it. The engineer, a guy named Robert Chen, spent an hour looking at the bridge from every angle. When he was done, he came up to the house to give me his report. "The bridge is perfectly sound for its intended use," Robert said. "It's well maintained, structurally solid, and more than adequate for light vehicle traffic. There's no basis for condemnation. Between you and me, I think this complaint was filed in bad faith." "Can you put that in your report?" I asked. "Already did," he said with a slight smile. Winter came, and with it, a temporary lull in the hostilities. The snow made the roads more difficult to navigate, and people seemed more focused on getting through the holidays than fighting over my bridge. I spent Christmas with my sister's family in Billings, grateful for the break from the constant conflict. But in January, things heated up again. Sharon and the HOA tried a new tactic. They started a petition to have the county create a new public access route across my property through eminent domain. They claimed it was in the public interest to provide better access to the developing areas north of Bozeman. This was more serious than their previous attempts. Eminent domain cases were complicated, and while I believed I would ultimately prevail, the process could take years and cost tens of thousands in legal fees. Pete and I started preparing our defense, but we also decided to go on the offense. We filed a harassment lawsuit against the HOA, documenting all of their frivolous legal actions, the trespassing incidents, the vandalism, and the threatening phone calls. We also filed a complaint with the Montana Attorney General's office, arguing that the HOA was abusing its authority and engaging in a pattern of harassment. The harassment lawsuit got their attention. Suddenly, Sharon was calling me, trying to sound conciliatory. "Mr. Lawson, I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said over the phone. "Maybe we can sit down and work something out." "What did you have in mind?" I asked, curious where she was going with this. "What if we paid for a complete bridge rebuild? We could upgrade it to handle more traffic and we would cover all the costs. You wouldn't have to spend a dime." "And then what? I let your residents use it for free." "Well, we would pay you for the easement, a one-time payment. We're thinking $50,000. I almost laughed. "Sharon, do you have any idea how much an easement like that would actually be worth? You're talking about 100 families getting daily use of my property, saving 2 miles each way, every single day. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars in value over time. And that's not even counting the liability issues, the maintenance costs, or the fact that it's my property and I don't want strangers driving across it all day long." "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice getting sharp again. "Name your price." "There is no price. I don't want to sell." "How many different ways do I have to say it?" She hung up on me. The eminent domain petition went before the county commissioners in February. Pete and I presented evidence that there was no legitimate public need for the easement, that existing roads adequately served the area, and that the petition was being driven by a private HOA for the benefit of its members, not the general public. The commissioners agreed. They denied the petition unanimously, with one commissioner specifically noting that eminent domain was meant for legitimate public needs, not to provide convenience to private developments. I thought that might be the end of it. I should have known better. In March, I woke up one morning to find that someone had cut the lock on my gate during the night. The gate was standing open, and there were fresh tire tracks across my bridge. I called Deputy Tom Morrison, who came out to investigate. That's destruction of property, Tom said, examining the cut lock. Plus trespassing. You got any idea who did it? Take a wild guess, I said. We looked at the footage from my security cameras. At 3 in the morning, a car with no license plates visible had pulled up to the gate. Someone got out, cut the lock with bolt cutters, pushed the gate open, and drove across. The person was wearing dark clothes and a hood, so we could not identify them. I'll file a report, Tom said, but without a clear identification, there's not much I can do. I replaced the lock with an even heavier one and added more cameras. 2 nights later, they tried again. This time, the cameras caught a better angle. The car was a silver Honda Accord, and we could make out part of the license plate. Tom ran the partial plate and narrowed it down to 3 vehicles in the area. All 3 belonged to residents of Riverbend Estates. Tom went to interview the owners. 2 of them had solid alibis, but the third, a guy named Kyle Henderson, got defensive and refused to answer questions. Tom couldn't arrest him without more evidence, but we both knew he was the most likely culprit. I installed a chain and padlock on the gate in addition to the regular lock, and I started parking my truck across the driveway at night, making it impossible for anyone to get through even if they cut the locks. That's when things took a darker turn. One night in early April, I was woken up by the sound of breaking glass. I grabbed my phone and my flashlight and ran downstairs to find that someone had thrown a brick through my front window. Attached to the brick was a note that said, "Stop being selfish. Share the bridge or else." I called the sheriff's department immediately. Deputy Tom Morrison arrived within 20 minutes, along with another deputy I did not recognize. They took photographs, collected the brick and the note as evidence, and filed a report. "This is escalating," Tom said. "You might want to think about staying somewhere else for a while." "This is my home," I said. "I'm not leaving because some HOA bullies want to intimidate me." "I respect that, but Marcus, these people are getting desperate. Desperate people do stupid things." I appreciated Tom's concern, but I wasn't going anywhere. Instead, I installed additional security measures, motion-activated lights around the house, more cameras, and a better alarm system. I also made sure my shotgun was loaded and readily accessible. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I wasn't going to be run off my own land either. The next HOA board meeting was apparently quite eventful, according to Bill the rancher, whose sister lived in Riverbend Estates. She told him that Sharon had stood up in front of everyone and complained about me for 20 minutes, painting me as some kind of villain who was deliberately making everyone's lives harder. She tried to rally support for more legal action, but apparently some residents were getting tired of the whole thing. The HOA had already spent over $30,000 in legal fees with nothing to show for it, and some people were questioning whether it was worth continuing. But Sharon was not deterred. She announced that they were going to pursue criminal charges against me for creating a public nuisance. It was absurd, but it meant I had to deal with yet another legal headache. The county attorney, a reasonable woman named Lisa Martinez, who happened to be Sharon's cousin, called me in for a meeting. When I arrived at her office, she had a tired expression that suggested she was not happy about the situation. "Mr. Lawson, I'm required to follow up on complaints, but I want you to know that I don't see any basis for criminal charges here," Lisa said. "You own private property, and you have every right to control access to it. The fact that some people find it inconvenient to use public roads is not a crime." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate your objectivity. Off the record, I've told Sharon to drop this whole thing. She's wasting everyone's time and money, including the HOA's. But she's convinced she's in the right, and she won't listen to reason." "Sounds about right," I said. The criminal complaint went nowhere as expected, but the harassment continued. I would find garbage dumped at the end of my driveway. Someone let the air out of my truck tires when I went into town. I got prank phone calls at all hours of the night. Pete and I pressed forward with our harassment lawsuit. We now had substantial evidence. The frivolous legal actions, the vandalism, the threatening note, the trespassing incidents, and testimony from multiple witnesses about the HOA's pattern of behavior. We also subpoenaed the HOA's meeting minutes, which revealed that Sharon had explicitly encouraged residents to make my life difficult in hopes that I would give in. The case went to trial in June. It was a bench trial, meaning Judge Griffin would decide the outcome without a jury. Pete presented our evidence methodically, building a clear picture of sustained harassment and intimidation. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the residents were simply exercising their right to petition for redress of grievances, but Judge Griffin was not buying it. There's a difference between legitimate legal action and harassment, the judge said. The evidence shows a pattern of escalating behavior that goes well beyond normal legal remedies. The HOA board members, particularly the president, Sharon Martinez, have encouraged and engaged in conduct that crosses the line into harassment and intimidation. He ruled in our favor, ordering the HOA to pay $25,000 in damages and enjoining them from any further legal action regarding my bridge unless they had genuinely new evidence or claims. He also issued a restraining order that prohibited Sharon and other named board members from coming within 500 feet of my property. I felt vindicated, but I also knew that the money judgment would be paid out of HOA dues, meaning it was really the residents who would suffer, not Sharon personally. Still, it was something. The judgment got attention in the local media. The Bozeman Daily Chronicle ran a story about the case, framing it as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. I got interviewed by a reporter, and I tried to explain my position clearly. I'm not against my neighbors, I told the reporter. I'm not trying to make anyone's life harder. But this is my property, and I have the right to control who uses it. If the residents of Riverbend Estates have a problem with their commute, they should take it up with the developer who built their neighborhood or petition the county to improve the roads. It's not my responsibility to solve their problem by giving up my property rights. The story was shared widely on social media, and I was surprised by how much support I received. Property rights were a big deal in Montana, and a lot of people saw my situation as a warning about what could happen when HOAs got too aggressive. But not everyone was sympathetic. I still got hate mail and angry phone calls. Some people in town treated me like a pariah. One restaurant owner asked me to leave when some Riverbend Estates residents complained about my presence. Through it all, I stood firm. My bridge remained closed to everyone except me, and the residents of Riverbend Estates continued to drive the extra 2 miles around to reach town. Then in August, something unexpected happened. There was a recall election in Riverbend Estates, and Sharon was voted out as HOA president. Apparently, enough residents had gotten tired of the legal fees and the negative attention. A new board was elected, led by a retired engineer named George who seemed much more reasonable. George called me a week after the election. "Mr. Lawson, I want to apologize for everything that's happened over the past year," George said. "The previous board handled this situation poorly, and you've been treated unfairly. I want you to know that the new board respects your property rights, and we're not going to pursue any further legal action." "I appreciate that," I said, surprised by his straightforward approach. "I do have a question, though," George continued. Is there any scenario where you might consider allowing limited access to your bridge? Not demanding, just asking. If we could work out an agreement that addressed your concerns about liability, maintenance, and privacy. I thought about it for a moment. The truth was, I wasn't opposed to being a good neighbor. I was opposed to being bullied and having my rights trampled. What did you have in mind? I asked. What if we built a completely new bridge, not on your property but just upstream from yours? We would pay for it entirely, get all the permits, make it a proper county road. It would still save our residents time compared to going all the way around, and it wouldn't involve your property at all. Where would you build it? There's a section of county land about 300 yards upstream from your bridge. It's a narrower crossing point. The county engineer says it's feasible. We would donate the bridge to the county once it's built, so it would become a public road and we wouldn't have to worry about ongoing disputes. It was actually a reasonable solution. That would work for me, I said. As long as it doesn't affect my property. It wouldn't. We would need to connect it to the county road, but that's all public land. Your property wouldn't be involved at all. Then I don't have any objection. George sounded relieved. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I'll start working with the county on permits and engineering studies. This will probably take a while, but at least we have a path forward. Over the following months, I watched as the HOA worked with the county to build their new bridge. It was a substantial project, costing the HOA over $200,000, but they were committed to it. The new board had convinced the residents that it was worth the investment to finally resolve the issue and avoid further legal problems. The bridge was completed in April of the following year, almost exactly 2 years after Sharon had first knocked on my door. It was a nice piece of work, wider and sturdier than my bridge, designed to handle regular traffic. The county officially accepted it as a public road, and residents of Riverbend Estates finally had their shortcut to town. But here is where things took their final turn. In May, about a month after the new bridge opened, I was contacted by the FBI. 2 agents showed up at my door, identified themselves, and asked if they could speak with me about Sharon Martinez. What about her? I asked, confused about why the FBI would be involved. We're investigating allegations of financial crimes related to the Riverbend Estates HOA. One of the agents, a woman named Agent Sarah Collins, explained. We've been reviewing financial records as part of a broader investigation, and your lawsuit against the HOA brought some irregularities to our attention. What kind of irregularities? We can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation, but we wanted to ask you about the legal fees and other expenses the HOA claimed to have incurred during your dispute. I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much beyond what had been presented in court. But apparently, that was helpful because it corroborated other information they had received. 3 weeks later, Sharon Martinez was arrested. It turned out she had been embezzling from the HOA for over a year. The legal battle with me had provided perfect cover for her theft. She had been inflating the legal bills, creating fake invoices from contractors who never did any work, and pocketing the difference. In total, she had stolen nearly $80,000 from the HOA's accounts. The arrest made news throughout Montana. Sharon was charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The case went to trial in September, and she was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution. Several other former board members, including Douglas and Patricia, were also investigated. Douglas had apparently known about some of the fraud and had received kickbacks, and he ended up pleading guilty to conspiracy charges. Patricia was not charged, but she resigned from the HOA and moved out of state. For me, the whole saga had a strange kind of closure. My bridge remained private, just as it had always been. The residents of Riverbend Estates had their new bridge and no longer had any reason to bother me. And the person who had caused so much trouble for everyone had finally faced consequences. George, the new HOA president, stopped by my house one afternoon in October. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "If you had not stood your ground and fought back, Sharon might have kept stealing from us indefinitely. The lawsuit exposed her financial irregularities." "I was just protecting my property," I said, "but I'm glad something good came out of it." "The new board wants to make a fresh start with the community. We're trying to be better neighbors to everyone, not just our residents. If there's anything we can do to make up for the trouble you went through, please let me know." "I appreciate that, George. But I think the best thing you can do is just be respectful of property rights and work with people instead of against them." "That's the plan," he said. Life gradually returned to normal. The harassment stopped. My mailbox was no longer vandalized. People in town stopped giving me dirty looks. I even started getting friendly waves from some Riverbend Estates residents when I drove past their new bridge. My lawsuit against the HOA was settled for an additional $15,000, which the new board agreed to pay without contest as a gesture of goodwill. I used the money to make some repairs to my barn and buy a new tractor. Bill the rancher stopped by one afternoon in November with a six-pack of beer, and we sat on my porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "You did good, Marcus," Bill said, "standing up to those HOA folks. A lot of people would have just given in." "I'm just stubborn, I guess," I said. "My dad always told me that if you give up your rights once, people will keep trying to take more." Seemed like a principle worth defending. It was. You set a precedent. Other HOAs in the county have been a lot more careful about trying to push property owners around. "Good," I said. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the cold beer and the quiet evening. My bridge stood peaceful and empty behind the locked gate, exactly as it should be. The creek burbled below it, just as it had for generations. Everything was as it should be. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned a lot about standing firm, about property rights, and about the importance of not letting bullies win, whether they carry clipboards and speak in legalese or not. The 2 years of conflict had been stressful and expensive, but in the end, I had protected what was mine, and that mattered. My grandfather had worked hard to buy this land. My father had maintained it and built that bridge with his own hands. It was not just about property. It was about legacy, about family, and about the principle that a person's rights should not be trampled just because it would be more convenient for others. The residents of Riverbend Estates ended up with a better solution anyway. A proper bridge on public land that would not create ongoing disputes or legal liability. If Sharon and her board had approached the situation differently from the beginning, with respect and reason instead of demands and intimidation, they could have reached that solution 2 years earlier and saved everyone a lot of trouble and money. But some people need to learn lessons the hard way. As winter approached again, I prepared my property for the cold months ahead. I made sure the driveway was graded properly for snow removal, stocked up on firewood, and did the usual seasonal maintenance. My bridge got a fresh coat of wood preservative, and I reinforced a couple of support beams that were showing their age. The gate stayed locked, with my security cameras keeping watch. But I no longer worried about vandalism or trespassing. The war was over, and I had won, not by being aggressive or unreasonable, but simply by standing firm and refusing to let others take what was mine. On Christmas Eve, I found a card in my mailbox from George and several other Riverbend Estates residents. It was a simple gesture, wishing me happy holidays and thanking me again for being patient with the community as they worked through their problems. Inside was a gift card to my favorite restaurant in Bozeman. I appreciated the gesture. It showed that not everyone in the HOA had been against me, and that reasonable people could eventually prevail over the unreasonable ones. I spent Christmas Day with my sister and her family again, and over dinner, my brother-in-law asked me if I regretted how everything had played out. "Do you ever wish you had just let them use the bridge?" he asked. "It would have saved you a lot of headaches." I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No, because it was not really about the bridge. It was about whether someone can be bullied into giving up their rights just because other people find it convenient. If I had given in, what would have stopped them from making other demands? Property rights matter. Boundaries matter. Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it, even when it would be easier to give in. My sister nodded. "Dad would have been proud of you." That meant more to me than any legal victory or settlement check. My father had been a man of principle, and he had taught me to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. I had honored his memory by protecting the land and the bridge he had worked so hard to maintain. As the new year arrived, I found myself at peace with everything that had happened. The conflict had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also reinforced something important to me about who I was and what I believed in. I was not someone who could be pushed around or intimidated into giving up my rights. The bridge remained standing, strong and sturdy, carrying only my truck across the creek, just as my father had intended when he built it. The Riverbend Estates residents drove across their own bridge on their own road, and everyone was finally satisfied with the arrangement. Sharon Martinez was serving her prison sentence, a cautionary tale about what happens when people let power and greed override their judgment. Douglas had received probation and community service as part of his plea deal, and he had also moved away from the area. The new HOA board under George's leadership had transformed Riverbend Estates into a much more reasonable community organization. They focused on maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events, instead of trying to control everything their residents did. They built good relationships with surrounding property owners and worked cooperatively with the county on community issues. In March, almost 3 years after Sharon had first knocked on my door with her clipboard and demands, I was invited to speak at a property rights conference in Helena. Other property owners wanted to hear about my experience dealing with HOA overreach, and I shared my story with an audience of ranchers, farmers, and rural landowners who all faced similar pressures from encroaching development. "The most important thing is to know your rights and to document everything," I told the audience. "Keep records, take photographs, save emails and letters, and don't be afraid to stand firm when you know you're in the right. Bullies back down when you refuse to be intimidated." The speech was well received, and I found myself becoming something of an accidental advocate for property rights in Montana. I had never wanted to be a public figure, but I recognized that my experience could help others who faced similar situations. Back home, life continued peacefully. I spent my days working on projects around the property, doing some consulting work for a construction company in Bozeman, and enjoying the quiet rural life I had always loved. The tourists came through in summer, heading to Yellowstone, and the hunters came through in fall, but my little corner of Montana remained largely unchanged. My bridge stood as a quiet symbol of the whole ordeal, a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, and that principles matter more than convenience. Every time I drove across it, I thought about my father and grandfather, and I felt grateful that I had been able to protect what they had built. The creek continued to flow beneath the bridge, carving its eternal path through the land, indifferent to all the human drama that had unfolded above it. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the Montana sky stretched vast and blue overhead. And Sharon Martinez sat in a cell in Montana women's prison, probably thinking about how different things might have been if she had just taken no for an answer and worked cooperatively, instead of trying to bully and cheat her way to what she wanted. Her theft and fraud had earned her a criminal record, prison time, and the loss of everything she had built in her life before. Meanwhile, my gate remained locked, my bridge remained private, and my property remained mine. Justice had been served, property rights had been protected, and I could finally rest easy knowing that the long battle was truly over. As I sat on my porch that spring evening, watching the last light fade from the sky and listening to the creek babble in the distance, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The fight had been worth it. The principle had been worth defending. And my little piece of Montana remained exactly as it should be, private and peaceful, protected and preserved for future generations, just as my grandfather had intended when he first bought this land 70 years ago.